The first key, if you're going to get through to someone who is mind stuck or stubborn, is this. You need to aim for affinity. You've got to get people on board with you before you try and get them on board with your ideas or your perspective or with your views. And here's the interesting thing. This question of how do you influence others is not a new question. So Aristotle, 2,400 years ago, turned his attention to what is it that is effective in influencing other people. He came up with three fundamentals of rhetoric, which is the art of influencing others. These were the three fundamentals: ethos, pathos, and logos. So to make it really simple in sort of layman's terms, logos is about speaking to the brain, the logical faculties. Pathos is about speaking to the heart, the emotions. Ethos is about trust and credibility. And can I put it to you, the one that we overlook the most in modern times is ethos. And yet how critically important this is in laying the foundations for being able to get through to people when stubbornness does rear its head. Now, over the last 25 years, there's a number of researchers, but one in particular, who's figured out why Aristotle was so bang on. And it's this guy here, a guy named Dr. Paul Zak. And if you haven't heard of him before, brilliant researcher based in California. I'd encourage you to get a hold of some of his books, because what his research has done is really zeroed in on this question of trust. What builds trust between humans, and why does that become the foundation for being able to have influence? And what he looks at especially is the role that oxytocin plays. Now, oxytocin is our body's social bonding hormone. It is incredibly powerful. It is actually the hormone involved when mothers and babies are breastfeeding. That's what's released that creates a bond. Now, even if you've ever heard of oxytocin before, every single person here knows what it feels like. Because what it feels like is when you leave a conversation with someone, you're like, I don't know what it was, but I just feel like we really clicked. I really gelled with that person. It's so deeply unconscious, you don't know why, but there's a level of trust and affinity. That's oxytocin that has been released. And yet you sometimes have those situations where you leave a conversation with someone, you're like, I don't know, they said all the right things, but I just didn't feel like I gelled with them, didn't click. There'll be something unconsciously, a signal that's gone off that they are not trustworthy. Oxytocin was not released or present. And so what Paul's work has looked at is how do you actually, in an ethical way, facilitate that oxytocin release so that trust is built. And he would suggest there are three elements to do in this. The first element is authenticity, just being real. The truth is humans have a finely tuned BS meter, especially young people like Generation Y or Gen Z or millennials. They are incredibly attuned to BS, okay? And many of you know what that is. First word is bull. Second word, you can connect the dots, okay? But it is true. They sniff it a mile off. And this is so deeply unconscious for us as humans. If someone is saying something that is the right thing to say but isn't true for them, you pick it up. And there'll be no release of oxytocin. So being authentic is the first key. Number two, second key is synchronicity, to get in sync with the people you're trying to gel with or build rapport with. So somewhere this is about meeting the vibe, like the mood of that individual, the mood of the room. Sometimes you've got to read the room and figure out how do I match that. But there's a physical dimension to synchronicity as well. And you may have heard that advice over the years that if you want to connect with someone and build trust, you've got to mirror their body language. Have you heard this before? You've got to, if they cross their legs, you cross your legs. And if they scratch their ear, you scratch your ear. And I don't know about you, but I've always just felt a bit conflicted about that. It feels a little bit manipulative or just awkward, just randomly scratching your ear because they did. Okay, and it does work, but it's awkward and a bit contrived. And so I was actually having lunch with Paul Zak a few months ago when I was over in the States, and I asked him, I said, what are some non-awkward ways for physically mirroring someone to release oxytocin? And he said, well, there's a couple. Apparently, he said, you can clap together and you can sing together. So apparently choirs have this massive connection because of this. Clapping though, can you imagine sitting down for a bit? Can we just clap for a moment just to really get together? That doesn't work. So he said, but what he did say they've learned in the last few years is the simplest but most effective way to have that release of oxytocin, particularly if you're going to have a high-stakes, awkward conversation, go for a walk. Get out of the office. Do not have that conversation digitally, and don't have that conversation opposite each other at a table in a cafe or in the office. Get out and go for a walk. Why? Because when you're walking side by side with someone, eventually you start to match their cadence. You get in step. You synchronize, and when that happens, oxytocin is released. That's when trust begins to form.